Good morning, church family. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Sunday morning Bible class at the Broad Street Church of Christ. For the last 4 months, we've been seeking to answer the question, does archaeology support the book of Genesis? Wasn't here last week, and I'd like to thank Buddy for covering for me last week. Our last class 2 weeks ago, we completed our discussions of Genesis chapter 35. We discussed the biblical history and archaeological findings for the city of Sukkot, and we found that the archaeology supported the Bible's descriptions of Sukkot. We also talked about Bethlehem and Migdal Eder. And since that class 2 weeks ago, I've talked to several of you as I see you around town, and a couple of you suggested that I reiterate a point that I said last week, so I'll do that. The Bible has no restrictions as to where the Passover lambs or animals that are to be sacrificed at the temple come from. But the Jewish law, the Mishnah, which is the oral law that's passed down, does have a requirement, and the Mishnah requires that animals to be used for sacrifice in the temple must be raised in the area around Jerusalem, no further than Migdal Eder near Bethlehem. That's a quote from the Mishnah. That has an implication for us as Christians. Most of us recognize the fact that Jesus, the Lamb of God, died at the same day and time as a Passover lamb. But it was a revelation to me, and I guess to some of you as well, that Jesus was also born in the same place that the Passover lambs were born. So that concluded chapter 35 and our discussions 2 weeks ago. There are no place names in chapter 36, so we'll move on to chapter 37. Chapter 37 opens with Jacob living at Mamre near Hebron, where his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham lived. Verse 3 tells us that Jacob loved his son Joseph more than his other sons. The Bible tells us that the other sons were jealous of Joseph. Joseph had 2 dreams that involved his family members bowing down to him as if he were to rule over them. And that made his brothers hate him even more. Meanwhile, Jacob sends Joseph from Hebron Valley to see after his brothers who were tending the flocks near Shechem. When Joseph arrives at Shechem, the brothers have moved on, but Joseph meets a man wandering in the fields who knows where Joseph's brothers are located. And that leads us to verse 17. They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. So Genesis 37:17 provides one place name, and that is Dothan. Now this is not the Dothan that's known as Circle City or the peanut capital of the world in lower Alabama. This is the Dothan that's in Israel. In Hebrew, Dothan means 2 wells. The biblical city of Dothan is known to archaeologists as Tel Dothan or as Tel al-Hafirik in Arabic, which means reservoirs to catch water. So in Hebrew, 2 wells; in Arabic, reservoirs to catch water. This is the same map I showed you 2 weeks ago, only this time I added the location of the biblical city of Dothan. Jacob sent his son Joseph from Mamre near Hebron, which is here, to the land previously purchased in Genesis chapter 33 near Shechem, which is here. That's a 50-mile journey, probably take him 3 days to get there. His brothers weren't there, but he was told they were in Dothan. So he traveled another 15 miles or so to the north to Dothan, which is here. Dothan is mentioned 3 times in the Bible. Twice here in Genesis chapter 37, at the time of Jacob and his son Joseph. Dothan is also mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 13, as the hometown of Elijah during the time of the divided kingdom. This is a list of historical documents outside of the Bible where Dothan is mentioned. Dothan is on the list of 350 cities that paid tribute to Egyptian Pharaoh Thutmose III of Egypt. This list is on the walls of the Amun Temple in Karnak, Egypt. I've discussed this list several times in this class, so I'm not going to go over the history again today. The inclusion of Dothan on this list indicates that the city of Dothan existed in the decades just prior to the Israeli conquest of Canaan. Dothan is mentioned in the book of Judith. Now, this book is not part of the Hebrew Bible, nor is it a part of our Protestant Bible. It is included in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles. Dothan is mentioned as a camp location of an invading Assyrian army during the time of Elijah in the divided kingdom era. A version of this story is also told in 2 Kings chapter 6. The book of Judith is believed to have been written at about 150 BC. Dothan is also mentioned in Eusebius's book entitled Onomasticon, written about 320 AD. Dothan is mentioned as being about 12 Roman miles north of Shechem. I'll remind you that a Roman mile is just a little shorter than a English mile. This slide is a list of archaeological studies that were conducted at Tel Dothan. This slide is a list, between 1851 and 52, a Dutch cartographer named Charles William Meredith van de Velde visited Palestine, where he carried out surveys and drew maps of several archaeological places, including Dothan. He described his findings in his 1854 book entitled Narrative of a Journey Through Syria and Palestine in 1851 and 1852. 14 plus years later, between 1866 and 77, British Army officers Charles William Wilson, Claude Rainier Condor, and Horatio Herbert Kushner of the Palestine Exploration Fund conducted surveys of Palestine, including Dothan. Their findings were published in their 1885 book entitled The Survey of Western Palestine, Memoirs of the Topography, Orography, Hydrography, and Archaeology. 100 years after the first survey, between 1953 and 64, American Joseph P. Free, a professor of biblical archaeology at Wheaton College, and his wife, Ruby Aldrich, conducted yearly excavations at Tel Dothan. No further excavations were conducted after 1964. This is an area photograph of Tel Dothan. Like I said in the previous slide, there haven't been any archaeological excavations in 60 plus years, so the place is overgrown. You see a lot of green on that hill, which wasn't there when they finished with the excavations 60 years ago. The Patriarchal Era Citadel, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, is located here at Point A. The gate, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes, is between points D and D here. And there's a staircase here, which I'll talk about, which goes down the hill. There's a well here, and there's another well which is off this map. Jewish tombs dating from the Judges era are between points K and D in this area right here. And an administrative building dating to the time of King Solomon is located in this area right here. This slide, when I'm finished, will be a comparison of the biblical history of Dothan and the archaeological findings at Tel Dothan. The Bible is silent about Dothan during the pre-patriarchal era. Archaeology tells us that the earliest settlement at Tel Dothan occurred about 3000 BC, which is prior to the flood. Evidence shows that the settlement was built, destroyed, and rebuilt about 7 times between the flood and the time of Joseph. This parallels the rebuilding and destruction at other nearby sites of Megiddo, which is about 15 miles north of Dothan, and Bethshan, which is 15 miles northeast of Dothan. The city at this time had a heavy city wall about 25 feet high and 11 feet thick at its base. The Bible, in Genesis 37, tells us that there was a settlement at Dothan at the time of Joseph. The Bible's not specific as to whether the settlement was a city, a town, or a village. Archaeology tells us that a 10-room citadel existed at the time of Joseph. The walls of the citadel were 4 feet thick. The citadel abutted against the inside of a heavy city wall near the gate. There was a 13-foot wide staircase leading to the gate from the outside of the city. About 200 feet outside of the city wall was a well that existed prior to the time of Joseph. A second well was also found at the foot of the Tel, along with several empty cisterns. This second well is believed to be where Dothan got its Hebrew name. The empty cisterns is likely the source of the Arabic name, and one of the cisterns is likely the place where Joseph was placed while waiting for the caravan. Pardon me. The Bible is silent about the city of Dothan during the era of the Israeli conquest of Canaan. Archaeology tells us that Dothan was heavily populated at the time of the Israeli conquest of Canaan. Thousands of Canaanite potsherds were found dating to this period. The citadel from the patriarchal era still existed at the time of the conquest. The existence of the Canaanite potsherds indicates that the city was occupied by the Canaanites. And this is an example, a very small number of the pottery sherds found at Tel Dothan. They all exist in the Israeli Museum, the Bet Alpha Archaeological Museum in Israel. And these are all examples of Canaanite pottery. The Bible is silent about the city of Dothan during the Judges era. Archaeology tells us that the citadel from the patriarchal and conquest eras still existed at the time of the Judges era. Evidence shows that the population of Dothan at the time of the Judges was Jewish. More than 600 Jewish tombs were found on the western slope of the Tel, dating to this time period. In these tombs were found over 3,200 clay lamps, oil jugs, and bowls. Also found in these tombs were over 200 bronze objects, to include daggers, spear points, chisels, and a bronze lamp. The Bible is silent about the city of Dothan during the United Monarchy era. Excuse me. Archaeology tells us that a governmental administrative building existed at the time of King Solomon. The building contained a room with 96 small storage jars, all the same size, likely used as standard measures for collecting taxes in oil and other commodities. The Bible, in 2 Kings chapter 6, tells us that Dothan is the hometown of Elisha during the time of the divided kingdom. In verse 14, the king of Aram and his army surrounds Dothan, attempting to capture Elijah. Elijah opens his servant's eyes to see an army of angels in chariots of fire in the hills around Dothan. In verse 18, as the enemy approaches the city, Elisha prays that the Arameans will be blinded, and they are. Archaeology tells us that the city was occupied until about 725 BC. Then the city was destroyed. This corresponds to the time of the Assyrian capture of Samaria by Assyrian king Shalmaneser V, which is described in 2 Kings chapter 17 and 2 Kings chapter 18. Also found, dating to this time frame, was a pagan altar indicating pagan worship during this period. Although the Bible doesn't mention it, archaeology tells us that there were settlements of Dothan during each of the Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and Muslim eras. So, in conclusion, archaeology supports the claims that the Bible makes about the city of Dothan. This ends our comparison, so let's move on to the next verse with a place name. And before I move on, are there any questions about Dothan? Joel?
How many, you said it was destroyed 7 times to rebuild?
Yes.
What destroyed it before?
Well, this was all been during the Canaanite period and was not documented in the Bible. The Bible didn't document the Canaanite issues. I did not dig to find any historical records to see if I could identify any of those times. But whatever happened to Dothan also happened in those two cities, right off the top of my head, Megiddo and Bethshan, which are within 15 miles of that. So whatever happened there happened in those two places. It was likely some sort of a violent battle, a takeover. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on. When Joseph arrived in the pastures outside of Dothan, his brothers stripped him of his ornate robe and threw him into one of the empty cisterns that we just talked about. While they were eating their meal, a caravan of Ishmaelites approached them coming from Gilead on their way to Egypt. Joseph's brothers sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and the Ishmaelites took him to Egypt. The brothers slaughtered a goat and used a goat's blood to stain Joseph's coat. They took the coat back to their father Jacob and told him that was all that they could find of Joseph. Meanwhile, the Ishmaelites sold Joseph into slavery to Potiphar, the Pharaoh's captain of the guard. And that completes chapter 37. Chapter 38 opens with Judah, one of Joseph's brothers, leaving his brothers. And let's read verse 1. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man at Adullam named Hira. So Genesis chapter 38 gives us a place name called Adullam. In Hebrew, Adullam means justice or equity of the people. The biblical city of Adullam is known to archaeologists as Tel Adullam. Same map I just showed you a few minutes ago, only this time I added the location of the biblical city of Adullam. Tel Adullam is 22 miles southwest of Jerusalem, 13 miles northwest of Hebron, and which will become important in a few minutes, 13 miles west-southwest of Bethlehem. Verses 2 through 5 tell us that after presenting Joseph's coat to his father, Jacob, at Hebron, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man at Adullam. There he met the daughter of a Canaanite man and married her. The Bible doesn't provide her name, but she provides Judah with 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Adullam is mentioned 11 times in the Bible. Adullam is mentioned 3 times here in Genesis chapter 38 in relation to the story of Judah and his daughter-in-law, Tamar. This is in the patriarchal era. Adullam is mentioned once in Joshua chapter 12, verse 15, in a list of 31 kings conquered west of the Jordan during the Israeli conquest of Canaan. Adullam is also mentioned once in Joshua chapter 15, verse 35, as one of the 14 towns or villages in the western foothills of the Judean mountains allotted to the tribe of Judea during the Israeli conquest era. The cave of Adullam is mentioned 3 times in 1 Samuel 22, 2 Samuel 23, and 1 Chronicles chapter 11, as one of the sites where David sought refuge during the period while King Saul tried to kill David. This is during the United Monarchy era. Adullam is mentioned once in 2 Chronicles chapter 11 as one of the 15 towns King Rehoboam fortified during his reign over Judah. Adullam is also mentioned once in Micah chapter 1 during his prophecy that Judah will be invaded, conquered, and exiled. And this is during the divided monarchy era. Adullam is mentioned one last time in Nehemiah chapter 11 as one of the villages where the returning Judeans settled during the post-Babylonian era. When I'm done, this slide will list the mentions of Adullam from historical sources other than the Bible. According to the Assyrian king Sennacherib's annals, he conquered 46 Judean cities, including Adullam, during his military campaign into Judea in 701 BC. This is a composite photo of 3 prisms that detail Assyrian king Sennacherib's 8 military campaigns from 705 to 681 BC. The prism on the left is known as the Taylor Prism, named after the discoverer, Colonel Taylor of the British Army. This prism currently resides in the British Museum in London. The middle prism is known as the Chicago Prism and currently sits in the University of Chicago. The prism on the right is known as the Jerusalem Prism, and it sits in the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem. Assyrian king Sennacherib's campaign into Judea is described as his 3rd military campaign and is dated to 701 BC. All 3 prisms are about 15 inches tall. They're all 6-sided. All 3 prisms have identical accounts of Sennacherib's military campaigns. All 3 appear to have been made in 680 BC. One remarkable aspect about these 3 prisms is that the Assyrian history they attest to matches the biblical accounts in 2 Kings chapter 18 near perfectly. The Book of Maccabees are a collection of 8 books considered as historical texts that detail the Jewish revolt against the Greek Empire in the 2nd century BC. They were originally written in Hebrew and were translated into Latin. Some of them are included in the Catholic and Orthodox Bibles. They are not included in our Bibles. One of those books states that Judas Maccabeus retired to the city of Adullam after a battle against the Greeks. The 1st century historian Flavius Josephus referenced David's movements and the region of Adullam in volume 7 of his Antiquities of the Jews, written around 93 to 94 AD. The 4th century historian Eusebius described Adullam as a very large village. An Ottoman tax ledger from 1596 lists a village in the area of Adullam with its Muslim name, indicating a continued habitation into the early modern period. In summary, Adullam is mentioned in several extra-biblical historical texts over the last 2,700 years. Between 1866 and 77, British archaeologists Charles Wilson, Claude Conder, and Horatio Herbert Kushner of the Palestine Exploration Foundation conducted surveys in western Palestine, including Adullam. Adullam appears in their 1878 map. In their 1875 report to the foundation, they reported that Adullam was on a mound about 300 feet above the valley. They reported several stone walls in ruins on top of the mound. They reported a moderate-sized cave on the north side of the mound and several small caves on the neighboring west mound opposite of Tel Adullam. On the west side of Tel Adullam were tombs cut into the mound. They reported 2 wells of great antiquity in the valley north of the mound. They also noted a ruined village just north to the mound with the Arabic name Eid el-Ma, which appears to have preserved the ancient Hebrew name. In 2008, Tel Adullam became an archaeological park. An initial survey was conducted by Yehuda Dagan as part of the Judean Shephelah region. In 2015, another survey was conducted by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Their main objective was to map the distribution of pottery around the site, and their findings have not yet been published. There have been no excavations of this site. This is an area view of Tel Adullam. This one was taken from a satellite in December of 2009. The mound is located here, and you notice that it's heavily covered with trees. If I could blow this up, you'd be able to see the ruins of many walls on the summit. There's walls in here, some walls over here, some walls here. Some of these, like this right here, is a road. The cave on the north is located here, and I'll show you a picture of it later. There are several caves on the hill to the west, over here. There are tombs on the west side of the mound, here. There are 2 wells in the valley, here and somewhere in here. The ruins of the Arabic village of Eid el-Ma is here. And the security fence between Israel and the Palestinian West Bank is located here. You can't tell it from here, but this is a very high, very thick security fence to keep people from traveling both ways. The cave of Adullam is mentioned in 1 and 2 Samuel and in 1 Chronicles as one of the sites where David sought refuge from the king Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 22 tells us that after leaving the Philistine-controlled city of Gath, David went to the cave of Adullam. He was joined there by his brothers and others who were distressed by Saul. About 400 men were with him. Now, there's no way to know if this is the cave of Adullam. They have entered this cave. It is of moderate size. It would easily hold everyone that's in this room, but there's no way of knowing. It is the largest cave that's in that area. There are several caves in this area. If you stand on top of the mound of Tel Adullam and you look towards the west, that right there is the town of Bethlehem. 2 Samuel chapter 23 And 1 Chronicles chapter 11 tell us that while David was at Adullam, he longed for the water of his hometown of Bethlehem. 3 of his warriors overheard this and broke through the Philistine line and drew water from the well just outside of the gates of Bethlehem and returned to Adullam to give the water to David. Any questions about that? This is a photo of one of the many walls that surround Adullam. There have been no excavations of this site. So what archaeology can tell us is limited to the pottery and other articles that they have found in that area. However, the comparison is worth noting. The Bible is silent about Adullam before the patriarchal era. Archaeology has found no evidence of human activity prior to the patriarchal era. However, without conducting any real excavations, this can't be ruled out. The Bible, in Genesis chapter 38, tells us that Adullam was a settlement at the time of Judah during the patriarchal era. Pottery sherds found at Tel Adullam tell us that there was significant human activity there during the patriarchal era. Without excavations, the extent of the city of Adullam during this time frame cannot be determined. The Bible in Joshua chapters 12 and 15 tell us that Adullam was a fortified city at the time of the Israeli conquest. Archaeology confirms that Adullam has a walled, fortified city during this era. The Bible, in 1st and 2nd Samuel and 2nd Chronicles, tells us that, that David used the cave of Adullam as a refuge during the United Monarchy era. Archaeology confirms that there are several caves in the area around Adullam. Pottery found at Adullam also supports a settlement there during the United Monarchy era. The Bible, in the books of 2nd Chronicles and Micah, tells us that the settlement at Adullam was fortified by King Rehoboam during the divided monarchy era. Pottery sherds found at Adullam support the existence of Adullam during this time frame. Also, Assyrian military records support the existence of the biblical city of Adullam during this time frame. The Bible in Nehemiah, excuse me for a second. The Bible in Nehemiah tells us that Judeans returning from exile from Babylon returned to the resettled Adullam. Archaeology supports a Jewish settlement during this time frame. The Bible is silent about Adullam after the post-exile era. However, several historical texts confirm the existence of Adullam during the Roman and the Ottoman eras. In conclusion, archaeology supports the Bible's claims about the city of Adullam. So at this point, we'll move on to the next verse with the place name. Any questions? So given the time, I'm not going to start into the next city, which will be Timnah. But there is plenty of time for questions if you have them. If not, we'll get ready. Oh, question? That cave was a natural cave. In fact, all the caves, there are tombs that are on the western side of that mound, but the caves on the western hill and that cave that I showed you a picture of on the north side, those are natural caves. I mentioned that cave is large enough to hold everyone in this room. It appears that the back end of that cave is collapsed. So during the time of David, it may have been even larger than it is today. That is likely the cave that David was in, but there's no way of knowing for sure. There was pottery found in the cave that dates to the United Kingdom era, which would suggest that there were people in that cave during that time frame. Doesn't necessarily mean that David was there, though. Let me back up, because it does kind of look, it does look like someone has manipulated the entrance to that cave. Now, this was 13 miles away from Bethlehem and probably 25-ish miles from Jerusalem, and he's trying to hide. Well, actually, that doesn't make any difference. Saul wasn't at Jerusalem. Saul was up north. But yeah, he's quite a ways away from Saul. But hiding in a cave is, I guess, just as good a place as any. He initially went to the Philistines and tried to stay at Goth. The Philistines there didn't like the fact that the guy that killed Goliath was hiding out in his area, so David acted like he was insane. And he walked around babbling and had spittle going down. And the king there at Goth decided that he wasn't worth the effort to do anything about. David finally came to the realization he probably wasn't safe there. So that he went from there to Adullam. Now, Goth is not very far from here. It's less than 10 miles. So, and at this time, David later kicks the Philistines out of this region. But this is all, even this area here was controlled by the Philistines at that time. Well, you know, some people traveled by horse. The rich people traveled by horse, but most people traveled by foot. A young guy in his 30s could easily do 10 to 15 miles. In fact, I've done 20 in a day when I was a Boy Scout. When I was a Boy Scout leader, taking kids on a hike. So a 35-year-old could easily do 15 to 20 miles a day. Some of this region, it depends on where you hike, but some of this region is up and down hills, mountains. You know, 15 miles is probably a good estimate of how far they would travel in a day. To go from here to go from Hebron to Shechem would probably be a 3-day journey, for example. Any other questions? In that case, why don't we get ready for our worship service? Thank you. Next week, we'll talk about the city of Timnah.